I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
This is James Altucher. We're bringing you once again the James Altucher Show, and I'm here with my very good friend Ken Kurson, who, Ken, I can't believe how many things you've done in your career. And so welcome to the show.
James, thank you for that kind introduction. I'd like to make clear to all of your listeners that we are not related.
No, but you are paying me a lot of money to say good things about you, so I have to keep on saying them. No, I'm just kidding about that. But first, I want to give a little brief intro of you. You're the editor-in-chief of the New York Observer newspaper, which I just want to say has been one of my favorite newspapers for 20 years. And the reason I can tell you that is I remember 20 years ago reading this newspaper right before a date because I thought the date would be interested in me that I was reading such a high culture newspaper as the New York Observer. This was like in 1995. And now you're the editor-in-chief of that.
I feel the exact same way. You know, I've only been the editor here for a little over a year, but I've been a huge fan and reader of the Observer almost its entire existence. The paper was started about 25 years ago. When I first moved to New York, you know, pre-internet, early 90s, it was just trying to figure out what was going on in the city. This was my entry point. I read the Observer like cover to cover because, you know, you could find out news in a lot of places, but if you really wanted to understand how the city worked and who the power players were and what the media was doing, the Observer was it.
I agree, and that was part of the reason why I was reading The Observer, because my plan to get this girl to like me completely failed, so she didn't even know what the New York Observer was at the time. But in addition to being the editor-in-chief of the New York Observer, you've also helped run Giuliani's presidential campaign. You've written books. You actually co-wrote with Giuliani his book, Leadership. You were involved with Giuliani Partners. You've been an entrepreneur with Green Magazine. You're an editor at Esquire. You've done so many things. And what I like about that, and what I like about what we're going to discuss, is you've done what I've called, you've created a choose-yourself career. Like nobody could have just given you the career you've had. You've had to go out and hunt for that career. You had to kill for that career. You made it up yourself as you went along. And what was there does seem to be some themes, which is that you've been very involved politically. You've been very involved with helping others, like your Green site was a personal finance site, and you've been very involved in journalism. And I sort of see through, you know, all of these things running through every part of your career. But I wanted to briefly talk about, before we talk about publishing and the future of publishing and the New York Observer and so on, I want to talk about the Giuliani campaign and you know, how you got involved with Rudy Giuliani and, you know, what happened in that campaign.
Yes, let's start with my most humiliating and public failures. Could we please?
Yes, we can get to more personal failures later. We'll start with the public ones.
So I got involved with Rudy because when he was mayor of New York City, it was coming toward the end, back in the old days, you were limited to 2 terms, and he was coming toward the end of his second term and was looking to sort of tell his story, the way New York City had rebounded. And I had written this article about this lawyer named David Boies for the New York Times Magazine. And David Boies ended up signing a book deal with Talk Miramax Books. And they talked to me a little bit about helping him write it. And then when they signed Rudy to do a 2-book deal, they were also looking for co-writers for that. And so they brought in like 6 writers for Rudy to meet. In classic Rudy fashion, he hated them all and said, "Show me another 6." And I was like writer number 5 of that second.
Why do you say that
6.
was classic Rudy fashion? Like, did he have not like most people?
He's a demanding guy. It's not that he doesn't like most people. He's very friendly and was a great boss for the 8 or so years I worked for him. But he's a demanding person, and he has a very clear sense. In fact, I've learned a lot from the way he manages people now that I'm in a much lesser management role, but I've taken a ton of lessons from him. But he has a very clear vision of what he wants before he hires somebody or before he becomes a partner with somebody. So he and I was very different from the other. I later found out, because naturally I asked him, "So how come I got this job?" I know there were, at least 11 other writers trying for it. And most of the other writers, first of all, they were much older and more established than I was. At that point, I had only written 2 books, only one of which was a co-written book. So I didn't have this long list of successes that I could point to, 8 bestsellers or whatever. And all the other writers had come in and said, "Well, here's how it'll work, Your Honor. You'll go about your week, and we'll make an appointment for an hour a week, and I don't want to trouble you or get in your way, and I'll come back with some drafts. You'll criticize them, and we'll go from there." And I was like, "I want to hang out with you all the time. I want to be where you are. If there's a fire, I want to go there. If there's a cop injured in the line of duty, I want to be there." And that ended up being how he wanted to work as well. So that's how I've gone about my entire career, is that I feel I'm better off just being exactly as honest as I can be about who I am and the way I work. It's not going to be right for everybody. I've failed to get plenty of jobs that I wanted, but when it's right, it's really good because I've let people know what my strengths and weaknesses are.
And so you wrote this book with him. Then I see you got involved with Giuliani Partners, which was his kind of almost, I don't want to say it's an investment bank, but it was like a mini investment bank / consulting firm. And they sort of focused mostly on small capitalization public companies in the defense industry and the biotech industry. I encountered them quite a bit when I was involved in the hedge fund business, financing small companies. Often Giuliani Partners was kind of behind the scenes somewhere.
Yeah, that's pretty much accurate. Giuliani Partners, the consulting firm, was the part I was involved with. There was also a small boutique investment bank, but that was sort of a separate company, and I didn't have too much involvement with them. Sometimes Rudy would speak at events, and I traveled with Rudy a tremendous amount from the time he was done being mayor on January 1st, 2002, till he started running for president at the beginning of 2007. So I'd see those investment banking guys sometimes, but that wasn't the part I was involved in. I was involved in the straight consultant company. And really, I'm not a business consultant. I have some business background from having started some companies and selling some companies, but most of my background is just plain writer, and that's mostly what I did for Rudy, speech writing and editing and stuff.
Was most of his consulting basically speech appearances, or was he doing introductions with the government, or what was the nature of his consulting?
Well, both of the above, but also he was a hands-on consultant. Rudy gets involved, and that's his reputation. Sometimes for better, and sometimes for worse. I remember in the Rudy biopic in which James Woods played him. There's a scene where James Woods is running down stairs to the bowels of City Hall to figure out why something's not working, and gets to the bottom of it and discovers that these two people just don't like each other and won't talk to each other, and solves it. And that was really accurate, my assessment of Rudy. Like, starting with writing the book, he was deeply involved. I've done a bunch of these co-written books now. And as one of the great trial lawyers of his time, Rudy is deeply engaged in how to present arguments, and he left the prose stylings to me, if that's not too grotesquely pretentious a phrase to use. But in terms of how to present the thinking and the logic, he was deeply involved, and that's how he was as a consultant. Yes, he gave a lot of speeches, and yes, he made plenty of introductions, but he had business ideas. He would look at the way things were going. There was one company, I'm not sure which of their clients revealed their names or not, so I'll refrain from saying their names. But it one very well-known pharmaceutical company, it was a client, and they had a big problem with employees constantly stealing their stuff, because I guess if you treated it or broke it up somehow, kids could get high off it. So it was a dangerous thing. And Rudy got really into the nitty-gritty to figure out how to implement better security systems, more accountability, and better systems to help people spot theft, and also to help people avoid the temptation of theft.
And how do you avoid the temptation of theft?
Well, I think if you have more people in a room, stuff like that, I'm not an expert in this, so don't get me wrong, James. I could never have advised some company on how to prevent kids from stealing drugs to get high. But a couple of the suggestions were just not having people alone with the stuff as much, even if it cost a little more in terms of man hours or whatever. I think it created less temptation.
It's funny because my 11-year-old daughter just came up to me and said, your kitchen cabinet is like a pharmacy. And I started thinking, maybe not such a good idea to keep all the medicines within arm's reach of an 11-year-old.
Well, geez, James, I want to party with you, cowboy.
So okay. So then the Giuliani campaign, which I actually was there or in the hotel when he was announcing, and I was thinking, this guy has a really good chance. He was the number one front runner at the time, and it was the most brutal flame out I've ever seen in presidential history, except for maybe Muskie in 1972, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, it was brutal, James, and what happened is, it's just like a startup world. When your stock's at 500, you're probably not as smart as the market thinks you are, and when it's at 2 cents, you're probably not as dumb as it thinks you are. And that's what happened with Rudy. We were leading, from pre-announcement till about late September, basically on pure name recognition. Rudy was still basking in the warm glow of universally lauded performance during the attacks of September 11th. And so people knew who he was. But if you asked a lot of the smart money in Republican politics about the difference between these sort of nationwide polls and what it's really like to appeal to caucus voters in Iowa and primary voters in New Hampshire, they're two very different sports. So if you put a list of who do you think's going to win in the slalom, and you listed Arnold Schwarzenegger and 4 people you never heard of, then a bunch of sports fan would just put probably Arnold Schwarzenegger would win that poll over the other 4.
But Rudy does connect with people. I mean, it doesn't. You have to have enormous charisma to be mayor of New York City for 2 terms, and then he was known as America's mayor. So what happened in New Hampshire? What happened in Iowa when he tried to connect with the voters?
Well, Rudy connected very well with the voters. A lot of people loved Rudy and felt like he would have been a great president, but that doesn't mean he was necessarily their first choice as a Republican nominee. And one of the reasons I feel so strongly that our primary system is basically broken is you're talking about tiny percentages of America make these giant decisions, and they're not good cross-section samples either. The caucus system in the first place is it's a horrible way to do it, because it not, by virtue of it being a party thing, you're naturally going to get the most engaged individuals. But in a caucus, if some of your listeners have never been them, it's only the people who are willing to spend 5-6 hours sitting around there advocating for their candidate, bugging their neighbors to switch their vote if they had voted for someone who's not in the running. It necessarily favors the people on the fringes of either party. It's a terrible way to do it. Not to mention the fact that Iowa's a very small state. It's a very homogeneous state, and you're talking about a Northeast mayor with an Italian last name who had some positions that were out of step with Republican orthodoxy. So those people who didn't vote for him in Iowa and New Hampshire, I don't think they were saying he wouldn't have been a good president. I just think he didn't check enough of these sort of doctrinaire boxes that you have to.
I see. And then also, you mentioned kind of the Italian background. Perhaps this was why he didn't campaign as much in the South, where, certainly other candidates would have more appeal. And then just the combination of everything, there just was not enough energy or momentum to keep his campaign going.
Yeah, that's how it works. I mean, it gets real expensive if you don't come out of one of those early states with a big win or a big overperformance, at least, if not a win.
Do you advocate getting rid of the two-party system in general? Because in general, it doesn't seem to work at all. Like, the candidates are very similar. I mean, I in very rare cases can I tell the difference in policy, actually, between Obama and Bush. Like, it just seems like the two-party system and the lack of democracy, as you mentioned, in the primary system is just a total failure.
Yeah, I don't agree. I think the two-party system is a disaster, except for all of the other systems that have tried democracy, which is a inversion of the old democracy is terrible, except for all the other systems.
But do you think with the internet, perhaps there could be a new system? Like, I could vote directly from my house for all of the, potentially for any of the candidates. So, I can see all the candidates, I can read about their issues, I can participate in message boards or their communities or whatever, and there could be just one huge election on the internet where I could vote and learn and so on without the massive lobbying and the billions of dollars poured into campaigning and attack ads and so on. It just seems like
the problem with that, James, is that it doesn't recognize the role that states play. And I hear this a lot from very technologically savvy and sort of future-thinking people like yourself.
In other words, idiots.
But no, I don't think they're idiots. I just think that they think that there's a little bit of a lack of humility where you think that the founders had some good ideas 1,000 years ago, but now that we have the internet, everything is different. And I don't think the Constitution is different. I don't think the Torah is different. I think these received wisdoms have a lot more to them than a lot of futurists are willing to concede. And what you just described is a nice utopian idea, but it doesn't recognize the incredibly important role that the states play in keeping a check on federal power. So if everybody's voting at the exact same time in a national election, you hear a lot about getting rid of the Electoral College from the same kind of people, and I completely oppose that idea. I think the Electoral College is a brilliant idea.
Well, what about something in the middle, though, where people vote directly for electors, but there's not necessarily a two-party system?
Yeah, we don't have any law that makes a two-party system. We just have a de facto two-party system. There have been many third-party candidates who have tried. There's a couple people in Congress right now who are third-party. There's at least a couple now, and there have been others like Joe Lieberman in the recent past. So, it is possible to do. Mike Bloomberg was mayor of this city for 8 of his 12 years as an independent. So it is possible to get elected without the two-party system. But the reason it defaults to two-party is because everywhere that it's not, you get these kind of parliamentary chaos systems. And especially when you have a very strong chief executive, you can't be a strong chief executive when you only have the support of 11% that your party holds or whatever coalition that you can string together.
Well, let me ask about that then. Over the past century in particular, the role of the chief executive has gotten a lot stronger. There have been a lot more privileges taken away from Congress that the chief executive has sort of worked around the Constitution. For instance, our two wars right now in, Iraq and Afghanistan, these are not official wars, as per the Constitution, but they're more kind of military maneuvers. So has the chief executive taken too much power?
Yes.
Should power go back to the states?
Yes.
And how can you implement that right now? I mean, it's almost too late.
Is it too late? I think that there's a pendulum move on this kind of stuff. I can't believe how much the last two presidents have just seized power for themselves. And when you say that there's not too much difference between, I think you said Obama and Bush, I mean, there's a million differences on things of everyday importance to ordinary Americans. But that's one in which I completely agree with you. Both of the last two presidents seem to have this idea that whatever they want to do, they've got to just find some way to get it done, no matter what the Congress says, and it's unbelievable to me. You don't see that as much in terms of challenging court rulings. So the judiciary has remained strong, but through, I don't know if it's acquiescence of Congress or just bullying by the president, but it's been unbelievable how entire wars can be fought. These NSA programs, all this stuff can just be done by fiat. It's very troubling to me.
Yeah, so now looking forward towards, 2014 and 2016, it seems like Obama lately, I don't know if it's intentional or what, but it seems like he's taken a step back from really appearing in the news. And it just could be because he's a lame duck president. I don't know. But do you see kind of a transformation or a turning point in the upcoming midterm elections? And then 2016, who do you think are the top candidates in each party?
I do see Obama withdrawing from, he's never been a guy who's been rah-rah about support the party. He campaigned a little bit for John Kurson in 2009, and after that unsuccessful attempt to help a guy who I never got the sense he really loved, he felt like he had to keep his brand strong and let Congress behave like the children they sometimes can behave like. So if you read
let's face it, Obama's going to make $100 million speaking in the 5 to 10 years after his presidency is over. So there's no reason for him to ruffle too many feathers.
Yeah, I'm not as cynical about it as that, James. I mean, that you might be right, but I don't think so. Look, I didn't vote for Obama. I obviously don't agree with all of his policies, but I certainly don't think his motives are personal enrichment. That's never seemed to be what motivates him. But I also think, keeping a Democratic-controlled Senate or trying to get a majority in the House of Representatives is also not what motivates him. He's had a fair amount of success doing what he wants to do, regardless of whose hands the Congress is in. So I don't think he feels like he needs to get out there and really work hard for the Congress. And quite frankly, I think he just despises doing that. And then there's a question of whether it's effective. In the sixth year of a two-term presidency, those midterms almost always go against the incumbent party. We saw in 2006, George Bush, just getting brutalized in the House and the Senate. I think we'll probably see similar tough road for President Obama.
Okay, and then 2016, obviously Hillary Clinton is at least out the gate a front runner for the Democrats. I don't even know, maybe Biden could run, I don't know. But on the Republican side, there's Rubio, there's Rand Paul, Chris Christie's been having his problems lately. Who else what other names on either side of the party, either side of the bench there do you see coming out?
I think if Hillary runs, she pretty much clears the field of establishment candidates, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a robust progressive candidate who it'd be tough to overcome her. But I mean, I've seen this movie before when Rudy was running. That
would be depressing to her. Again, to lose to an unknown that comes out of nowhere.
But she might not run though. There have been questions about her health, which I don't know anything about, but it's a tough job to run for president. That I do know something about. And she's a very hard worker with very high standards, and I don't know that she'd do it if she didn't feel like she could be at her absolute best. I do think she clears the field of any establishment candidate the day she announces. But it could be a very robust progressive challenger. Any number of people could sort of fill that spot that was filled by Barack Obama last time. And then on the Republican side, all the names you mentioned, but the one you didn't mention, who I think should be given very serious consideration, is Jeb Bush. I have watched the way W has had his reputation restored over the past couple years. That's another pendulum type thing. People were so sick of him by the time he left, and the country was in such crisis that I think that that a lot of the good things he did were undervalued, and you've seen that crop up in a bunch of ways. I just saw Donna Brazile, the former campaign manager for Al Gore, give an extraordinary comment about George Bush having basically saved her family's life during Hurricane Katrina, which is very different from what people were saying back when that happened. So I think that Jeb Bush should not be underestimated as a serious contender.
That's really interesting. And on the Democratic side, who do you think are some of the progressive names that could come out of nowhere?
We keep hearing about Elizabeth Warren. That sets up sort of an interesting. You've already got the woman spot filled, and it shouldn't be that there's only one spot. There's no reason why we couldn't have not only a woman president but several credible female candidates. So that's a name you hear. And then I think that what the country would really be receptive to would be a strong governor type on the progressive side. Or if not governor, some kind of executive. So it could be like a business person, somebody who the people are so angry at Congress right now, and the feeling that nothing gets done at either house, that I think somebody who's got a reputation. That was what was so compelling about a Chris Christie candidate before Bridgegate, is that people felt like he was, post-party, just got stuff done. And as much as the famous hug with Obama hurt him among certain hardcore conservatives, it really helped him in New Jersey, where you saw the numbers he racked up just literally a few weeks ago in winning re-election. So I think a progressive who has a record of executive leadership versus legislative would be a very compelling case.
So what are some of these governors that are out there? Do you see any right now kind of laying the groundwork? Because it seems to me, and just from the little bit, I think I've mentioned to you outside of the context of this interview, I briefly considered running for Congress myself in these midterm elections. And what I saw is that the upcoming presidential candidates are already strongly laying the groundwork on a daily basis. Like, these guys are at work every day running for president in 2016 right now. And so do you see that happening among any kind of progressive governors out there?
No, because you can't at this stage, especially with Hillary casting such a gigantic shadow. She's virtually the incumbent. It's such a declaration of war if you start asking people to withhold commitments and public statements and stuff like that. So I don't see anybody actively organizing. But it's very early, and like I said, I don't believe that it's no lock that Hillary Clinton is going to run.
Right. And very interesting. Okay, well, Ken, I want to talk about, why did you decide to become the editor-in-chief of a newspaper? Now, again, a lot of us technophiles do view the newspaper business as a somewhat declining industry. I wouldn't say I totally agree with that. Like, I enjoy very much writing for newspapers. But what made you decide? What happened that got you to be the editor-in-chief of the New York Observer? And by the way, I just want to set the groundwork. Jared Kushner, the husband of Ivanka Trump, is the owner of the New York Observer. He bought it several years ago, and I guess in an attempt to turn it around, make it profitable, and then more recently brought you on as editor-in-chief.
Yeah, that's correct. So first of all, I want to make sure your listeners understand that the Observer is not just a newspaper. We're one of the fastest growing media websites there is. On the day I got here, our podcast rating was something like 3698, and I'm looking right on my wall where I track this stuff all the time. We're at 698 last week. So that's a gigantic jump to be among the 700 biggest websites in the United States.
Yes.
Is a big move for our company. To get to that elite level of the top 250 is a whole nother magnitude jump. but we kind of got on the outfield at this point. So our websites are growing very fast, James, and
so that's the NewYorkObserver.com or Observer.com and
Observer.com, BetaBeat.com, the Gallerist NYC, which is or the Gallerist NY, which is our visual art site, and then our trade publications too, which are Commercial Observer, Mortgage Observer, and Politicker NJ. All do very well. All are growing. And then we have some other print properties as well that your readers might not know so much about, but that are profitable and doing well. So I just want to make that clear, that when people say the New York Observer, just about everybody kind of pictures in their head the pink physical newspaper, but the bulk of the business is our web stuff. But to talk about the newspaper, you're a good example of why I believe so strongly in newspapers. There is still, with all that's been done on the internet, all the amazing publishing stuff that's innovated and that amazes me on a daily basis, there has still been no successful replication of what it feels to have a story on the front page of a newspaper, especially a newspaper that's on sale on newsstands.
I agree, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Ken, but just as an example, so just full disclosure, I write for the New York Observer, and the other day I got mailed my recent copy of the New York Observer, or this was about a week or so ago, and my wife was excited. She says, "Look, honey, you're on the front page of the New York Observer," and it does give a good feeling to have your byline there, and that's true.
It's really there's no replication of it either. I look at Ben Smith from BuzzFeed is a friend of mine, and he came and we're doing this series where people come and talk to our young team of journalists and share different experiences, and as much as BuzzFeed is one of the most innovative media companies in the world, they're doing tremendous journalism, and they're doing a lot of fun stuff too, and sometimes they do real fun stuff that's also really great journalism. That's sort of when they hit home runs. But even that, with the tremendous amount of millions and millions and millions of views they get, they're still... There's nothing quite like that. I can walk into any Starbucks in New York City and see a story a message that we're trying to get put in front of people who aren't trying to see it. That sort of passive connection is a very powerful thing, and it's almost more powerful in an age when more and more news is consumed on the internet, because it's so exceptional. I had a story a couple of weeks ago about that I personally wrote about I don't write that much for the paper, but I do sometimes. So I wrote this long story about the opinion page of the New York Times, and this feeling that a lot of their journalists had that even as the rest of the New York Times is really improving and innovating and trying a lot of things, the opinion page, in the view of a lot of people I interviewed, was not keeping up and had gotten bad. I can't tell you how it felt to see that around. I mean, from having seen it in your mailbox. But when you're seeing it on the newsstand, I actually got to see a few people pick it up and buy it. That's a very powerful thing, and it's a powerful incentive I can give to other writers who I admire and get them to work for us. And I think it's very powerful to illustrators as well.
Well, but I do think the Observer is a little bit of a different case in that, like in the case of your article, for instance, you're writing about other... in that article, you were writing about another media publication, so there's this insiderish feel, which you're an expert on, and there's a lot of people in New York interested in that type of topic. And I think if you have these sort of specialty topics with good writers, you could put together something that's unique and different from like a BuzzFeed. But in general, it seems the news cycle is no longer 24 hours. It's 1 second. So as soon as news breaks, it's trending on Twitter, and that's where the reporters look first. Not the reporters necessarily at the Observer, but at almost every other media publication. And even like a place like AP, they're finding their news first on Twitter, and then the reporters get to work. Do you find that? Economically, we see it also where you have, newspapers like the New York Times or the Washington Post start to produce, more and more declining numbers because of this effect. Do you see that happening in general across the industry, or where does that end up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very hard to break news in the physical newspaper because of the cycle you mentioned, and that's why I think that newspapers, the physical products that do their best work in the sort of the analysis and digestion and synthesis of opinion and of the news is that's the niche to be in. That happens to be where the New York Observer specializes, but that's where I'm most bullish. But look, let's not get carried away. The New York Observer has about 60,000 subscribers, so it's not some giant thing that's going to replace the New York Times or any other newspaper. It's a niche publication, and I understand that. And we're not looking to become a million circ publication. That's just not in the cards for us.
Why not, though? Why not, for instance, what happens if you were to take a BuzzFeed approach for some of your content and, expand out the pages of the Observer a little bit with, the 10 most ridiculous cat things you've ever seen and, add some of those ideas to a print publication just for the pure purpose of adding subscribers and circulation?
Yeah. I just don't think there's that much demand for it, or at least enough to offset the tremendous costs of printing, which are substantial. We're changing our format over the next few weeks. And so we've been through the pricing models with a bunch of different printers, and there's a bunch of people bidding for our business. That's an industry under attack, so they're bidding very aggressively. And even with the aggressive bidding, it's very expensive to make a newspaper. I do think you're seeing some innovation in that, though, in kind of what you're talking about. Like, one of our competitors is called Capital New York. They do a very good job and they actually have a bunch of former Observer people working for them. They cover mostly politics, city and state politics. And they just came out with a magazine that you can hold in your hands. I think both to have the kind of presence I'm talking about, where people can see their stuff as they walk into City Hall or the state capitol, but also because there's certain advertisers that you can get such a better rate from if you sell them a page in a magazine versus a certain number of clicks.
So again, with the New York Observer, though, it seems like I'll tell you where I think you stand out and where any newspaper could stand out, and that's by having quality writing, which is largely missing from the sites like BuzzFeed. Nothing bad about BuzzFeed. They do a really good job with their, very innovative and original titles and the slideshows and they've done a lot of market testing on what people actually like to view and so on. But for instance, in the most recent Observer, I really enjoyed, you had a full page review of B.J. Novak's collection of short stories, and obviously he's the guy who plays Ryan on The Office. Now he's written a somewhat literary collection of short stories. I don't see content like that on the internet, full page, as they say, TLDR, too long, didn't read, on the internet, but it's not too long to read in a real paper. And I think that's where the Observer stands out and where other papers should move towards, but they can't if you're a New York Times or a Washington Post and you have to feed millions of subscribers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these niche things, and it's very important to sort of understand your ambitions and not overshoot them. BuzzFeed has this tremendous thing going, but it's also got a thing going where a story, if they get an amount of page views, it would be like a gigantic hit for the scale of the Observer. It's like a disaster for them. So you have to understand what you're trying to be. And I think that the Observer, we're not there yet. I don't mean to paint too rosy of a picture, but I think I'm a year in. Most of the team it has bought in, and we understand who our audience is and what we need to do to have hits by the Observer standards, not by some tiny website standards and not by some giant website standards.
Although, again, you have these web properties like BetaBeat. There's no reason why that can't be an enormous hits generator, which could drive traffic to the other properties.
I agree and I disagree. I think you're absolutely right that there's no reason it can't be a giant site by itself. I think that BetaBeat is the one that is best poised for sort of hyper growth. But I don't agree that it can be a driver to the other sites. The theory is good, but we just haven't seen it. We've tried all kinds of tricks and stunts, and we have smart people working on SEO and stuff. People who come to us for tech news, they don't want to read the other great stuff that this company produces. In general, we can get a few of them to click if we have a really great headline, but mostly we can't. And that's fine. BetaBeat on its own could be a very large property.
So I wanted to go rewind quite a bit for you 15 years, you did Green Magazine, which was a personal finance site. I had never heard of it at the time, but I guess it was acquired by Bankrate. What's the role of personal finance sites now on the internet? Like, I don't really find any that are that popular. Like, most finance sites are more stock picking type sites as opposed to personal finance.
They are
I don't
all
even know what
horrible.
personal finance means anymore.
James, it's a embarrassment how bad personal finance is on the internet. It's a personal shame for me because I had such high hopes for Green. I started Green because Smart Money and Money Magazine and Worth Magazine I thought were all terrible. I thought they were all they all tried to adopt this very similar voice, what I call the know-it-all voice, where they'd use things like the price-to-earnings ratio, blah, 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 and they purposely drop in jargon that the average American wasn't all that familiar with in order to establish their authority and credibility. And I hate that kind of writing. I hate intentionally difficult concepts, and I especially hate it when I get the feeling that the person's only doing it because they don't really understand the stuff and they're trying to hide behind jargon. So I started Green Magazine as a way of taking my knowledge, which was not tremendous, but it was sort of better than the average person's personal finance, and combining that with my favorite way of communicating, which was a fanzine. You know, it's just something where it's really personal and in a language that the reader not only understood but was his own and sounded like him talking. I thought you don't have to sound like some professional CFA to talk about mutual funds in a comprehensive way. So Green really grew fast because of that. I think I was really onto something, and I thought, hey, if me out of my apartment in Chelsea can grow this little thing to over 10,000 subscribers and sell it to a publicly traded company for $1 million, then someone's going to take this idea, either with Green or with a bunch of other sites, and turn it into a $1 billion operation. And it just hasn't happened. You're exactly right. Almost every site is in some way or another a tout site designed to sucker people to buy different stocks or to short different stocks. It's so depressing. There really is room, in my opinion, for a legitimate inheritor to the Green mantle. I'm too old to do it at this point because it's really aimed at like beginners, but I wish somebody would do it.
Yeah, it's almost like if you combine and I hate to keep repeating the word BuzzFeed, but it's almost like if you combine BuzzFeed type ideas with personal finance. To some extent, I think Blodgett does it okay, or does it very well even with Business Insider, even if it gets too far on the slideshow idea. But I definitely think there's a hole in the industry for that. The stock touting websites, they get most of their traffic from Yahoo Finance, and that's really the key to their success. If you have a deal with Yahoo Finance where every time you mention a stock, Yahoo Finance points back to your site, you're going to get enormous traffic because that's the most popular finance site out there, and that's the key to success for all of these sites. So.
I agree about Business Insider being a good and worthy site for some things. I think it's a legitimate competitor to the Wall Street Journal for actual news, but I don't agree that it's where someone intimidated by the language of finance ought to go, because the sheer volume of stories there is intimidating, if not the language. There really is room for a curated, here's what you need to know type site. I wish it existed. It doesn't, as far as I know, and if any of your listeners wants to email me with some examples of it, I'd love to see it, because I feel, Green was my one great idea in my life, in my opinion, and even though I did well with it, I still feel like sort of guilty that it doesn't exist anymore for people who because its readers loved it. I mean, that's a dream publication to have founded, where you get letters from people saying, I just bought a subscription for every kid I know, for every high school graduate I know, that kind of thing. It's a real personal connection I have with those readers, and I feel bad that it doesn't exist. Why don't you carve off a site within the Observer empire to cater to that audience? It's such a different world. Our audience here at the Observer is for the influencers, the people who are real expert in their fields. Our household income is off the charts high, and I'm not suddenly looking to add a bunch of people making $41,000 a year to that demographic for because it screws up both audiences. And that's what was so special about Green. It was written for people who. It was written by people who reflected the reader's own circumstances. When I was 28 years old with my first job making $40,000, talking about what somebody with their first job making $40,000 ought to do with their first ever 401k, there was an authenticity that was very hard to duplicate.
I think the key in all of this that you're saying is that, what separates out any content or site is the authenticity. And I think that's very important, as opposed to, doing this massive A/B testing about what will drive page views and so on.
You're so right, James, and that's why these things that come out of nowhere, like Upworthy, is already sort of come out of nowhere, had its giant hit, now gone down, and then there's all these sites like Viral Nova that just literally appear out of nowhere.
Distractify, there's a new site every month that has 1 million unique visitors.
Right, they're clearly created just by somebody who's cracked some kind of computer formula on how to write a headline. But there's no soul there. You'd never feel like this is something I want to check over and over. It's a despicable way to approach publishing, in my opinion. And even if someone walked into the Observer's office right now and said, I've cracked the code, I can figure out how to do this, I wouldn't change our content to do it. Yes, I'd like to have better headlines and better tricks to get people to our great content, but I would not change our content itself just for the page views, because I just think it's not a way I want to live.
So what's next, though, in general in the media industry? And it's not just newspapers, but it's broadcast news. It's every kind of traditional. I don't want to call them gatekeepers, but every kind of traditional method of being informed and learning the news out there is getting hit hard by the internet, by essentially Twitter. Twitter has become the newswire of the masses. And ultimately, what happens to the major media companies?
The Twitter thing is not so terrifying to me, because there's a lot of hand wringing among people that we live in this low attention span universe right now, where 140 characters is our max. But I don't think that that's right at all. I believe we're kind of in a golden age of attention span. There's never been a time where people would watch 13 hours of beautifully written television in a row, the same show. And when you look at Twitter, what it's directing you toward is there are messages that are 140 characters, but often there's links to really thoughtful, long stories. The Observer's run stories. Last year we ran a 10,000-word story. We ran a 8,000-word story. The Times story I just mentioned to you was about 4,000 words. Next week we're running a 9,000-word story. And people will be tweeting about these stories and directing their friends to it. And if you look at the comments we get at the bottom of it, there's a lot of lunatics who just want to say, the Holocaust didn't happen or something. But even if you sort through those, you see a lot of people who will give these incredibly thoughtful replies that prove that they read every one of those 9,000 words, and it gives me a lot of hope. So, I don't think Twitter is the end of news. I think it's really the beginning. I mean, I'm learning about what's happening in Kiev right now through people who are heroically tweeting about it, and then I follow links to smart people who know who know much more about Ukraine than I will ever know. So I think it's all going to work together. I'm pretty optimistic, James.
Well, that's good. I am an optimist as well. And Ken, I really appreciate you taking so much of your time to join me on this show. We've talked about a lot of different topics, all of which are personally interesting to me, and I hope interesting to the listeners. So I really appreciate you coming on to the show.
James, you're one of my favorite writers. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks very much, Ken, and good luck today.
All right, talk to you soon.
For more from James, check out The James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.